Good, we got one.
So I heard. May I come in?
Yeah, please do.
So my name is Harnish, and I solve problems. Anyone seen Pulp Fiction? Oh, yeah. Okay, good. Thank God. I was hoping this wasn't like a super young crowd here today, but because none of my jokes will make any sense. I'm the CEO of Great Castle Security. We are the largest cybersecurity risk assessment, advisory, and mitigation firm in the country. And that sounds a little bit weird coming from a company who's headquartered in Troy, New York. At the end of this year, we should be around 50, 60 people, clients in every state. We have won numerous national awards for quality of service, as well as local awards for being a great place to work and all sorts of other things. Anybody ever hear of us here? Who has not heard of us? Great Castle Security. A couple of folks? Okay. Good. I love it. So you know who we are, and you probably know what we do and what we don't do. So I'm going to skip that part of this conversation. But my job here today and my entire goal is to recruit each and every one of you, but not as a pen tester. We have a pen testing team. We do lots of pen testing. We don't need any more pen testers. What we need is everything else. So I'll give you an example. 8:35 p.m. Eastern Time last night. Call from a multinational organization, 12,000 employees or so, that had detected some suspicious activity on their network. It looked like their office in Israel, their office in Germany, and then an office here in the States was simultaneously accessed in an unauthorized way, let's put it that way. And they're in the energy sector. And so they've got a lot of intellectual property for things like wind and power generation and other, sort of next generation technologies. And someone had claimed, right, so a number of emails went out at that time and were opened. They weren't necessarily social engineering type attacks. These were what I would say sort of pretext ransom notes, in the sense that they emailed the CEO, the CFO, a bunch of other leadership saying, we've got access to not just your domain controller, but a bunch of other file shares. We have access to your intellectual property. Here's a screenshot of basically an Active Directory tree and some other stuff to prove that we've got this access. Here are the credentials that we've compromised, or a sampling of the credentials, and it's going to cost you 14 Bitcoin if you want us to exit your network without actually taking anything else. And so now we've got a team deployed this morning to a number of different locations, and we're working with an organization to help them minimize the impact of what looks like it will be a fairly significant incident. At no time between 8:30 p.m. last night and this morning did we need a pen tester. We literally needed everything else. They were already broken. That company is already broken. And if you had never introduced me to the company before then, I would have told you that they're already broken, because guess what? Just like your company and my company and every other company out there, they're already broken. So my plea to you today is, let's think about something else other than testing, or penetration testing specifically, because, well, I'm about to give you about 8 good reasons to consider something else. Now, obviously, this is a selfishly motivated talk. As someone who, operates a company that is looking for the best talent every day, all day, we are hopeful that we can change some minds here today and get you to think about some other things that are very, very important in cybersecurity outside of testing and breaking things. So, Winston Wolfe, we need fixers. Again, anyone who's seen this movie knows that the only character you remember out of Pulp Fiction is, of course, John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson and Mr. Wolfe, because, he's the badass. He's the good guy. He sweeps in and just fixes everything. So we need more Mr. Wolves. So the backstory, this is my 4th company. I'm actually not a cybersecurity guy. I've been doing cybersecurity for about 20 years, but we didn't call it cybersecurity 20 years ago. But more than that, this is my 4th company. So I got into the internet and technology startup business in 1995. My first company IPO'd in 1999. I built a company with Kimball Musk, Elon's brother, in 99, sold it in 2001. I moved back to Albany in 2002, and I was basically the 5th employee and the 3rd largest shareholder at a company called Autotask across the river. And we were just acquired 2 years ago for about $120 million. At no point at that point in that sort of career history did I consider myself a security guy. I was always on the business side. even though I was doing lots of security things. And so my approach to cybersecurity is very different than perhaps yours is, which is I've got a business to run. I've got customers to protect. I've got data that's classified or otherwise worth something. It's certainly worth stealing. And so my approach to cybersecurity, and thusly Greycastle's approach to cybersecurity, has always been a business, making this a business problem. And so when we got into it, and certainly when Greycastle was invented 6 or 7 years ago, we started analyzing, well, what are the needs of organizations out there? And certainly pen testing was near the top of the list because it was hot. Like everyone was talking about pen testing, and we had been doing some cool things, and certainly we sort of recognized that there was some value in this. Over time, however, the problems are not in breaking things. The problems are in, well, how do I figure out what I should even be doing in cybersecurity? And what order should I be doing stuff? And how much of it should I be doing? What about people? What about testing? What about process? What about change management? What about, who knows, everything else? And so anyone who's been to our website recently will see everything. Pen testing is on there, and certainly we have a world-class pen testing team, but we really focus in other areas. So that's the backstory, and that's why I'm about to pitch a couple of things.
Here you go, Mr. Rob.
Thank you, Jimmy. Okay, first thing, you two. Take the body, stick it in the trunk. Now, Jimmy, this looks to be a pretty domesticated house. That would lead me to believe that in the garage, you're under the sink, you got a bunch of cleaners and cleansers and shit like that?
Yeah, Mr. Wolf, under the sink.
Good. What I need you two fellas to do is take those cleaning products and clean the inside of the car. I'm talking fast, fast, fast. You need to go in the back seat, scoop up all those little pieces of brain and skull. Get it out of there. Wipe down the upholstery. Now, when it comes to upholstery, you don't need to be spick and span. You don't need to eat off it. Just give it a good once-over. What you need to take care of are the really messy parts. The pools of blood that I've collected, you gotta soak that shit up. Now, Jimmy, we need to raid your linen closet. I need blankets, I need comforters, I need quilts, I need bedspreads. The thicker the better, the darker the better. No whites. Can't use them. We need to camouflage the interior of the car. We're gonna line the front seat and the back seat and the floorboards with quilts and blankets. So if a cop stops us and starts sticking his big snout in the car, the subterfuge won't last. But at a glance, the car will appear to be normal. Jimmy, lead the way. Boys, get to work.
So, anyone ever heard of WannaCry? WannaCrypt, this whole thing? Okay, that's a bit of a little security humor there. You can't really escape it. But up until what happened in the EU a couple of weeks ago, Greycastle Security was the response team for the largest ransomware attack in history. And you may not even have heard of it. It actually happened 4 hours west of here. A large level 1 trauma center, regional medical center, burn center, one of the largest 600 bed hospitals in the state. And if you compare what happened there to what happened at Hollywood Presbyterian, which I'm sure you've also heard of, the effect, the impact, the number of compromised assets, the days offline, about 10x that. Now, why have we heard about Hollywood Presbyterian? Why has that been national news? And even though this case was actually national news in some ways too, many of you have never even heard of it. Now, anyone with Google can figure out who it is in the next 30 seconds. But why do you think it is that you hadn't heard of it? Well, because there was an effective response team that was there helping that client minimize the damage from a debilitating, a massive ransomware attack. We need those folks, right? We need more responders. We need people who can understand the risk, because now we're in there and we're building a cybersecurity program for their organization, including risk and awareness and testing and all sorts of other things. Now, again, from our perspective, when we showed up on site there, and we had a team of 6 deployed for about 3 or 4 weeks, at no time did we need a pen tester. Right? That was already proven. We already knew things were broken, and they were probably broken before we ever showed up. So let me give you, I got 8 reasons here for you guys to consider doing something else. Anyone who's interested in interviewing with us, please send us your resume. And again, like I said, this is selfishly motivated. But the first is this. Most businesses today, including the case that we worked in Buffalo, including the case, the organization that called us last night, including, you name it, Sony, P.F. Chang, Target, Dairy Queen, it doesn't matter who it is, right? They don't benefit from a pen test today because generally speaking, you're proving things that they already know, right? And that's because they haven't built a cybersecurity program, right? When do we test? Do we test before we build stuff, or we do test after we build stuff? Well, you test after you build stuff, because otherwise, working backwards from results, there's no value in the findings. So if an organization has not built a mature cybersecurity program with mature controls, things that are measurable, based on a standard, whatever you think, why test, right? Now, again, you guys are getting a lot of attention today because, and we're getting attention for our pen testing services because it's sexy and that's what people think cybersecurity looks like as a pen test, right? And encryption and probably antivirus and firewalls. And you guys all know that that's not at all what cybersecurity is. So the first thing is this: if you consider yourself a value-based organism or work for an organization that is trying to produce value for its clients, pen testing is pretty much at the bottom of the list today. Because again, working backwards from findings, everyone looks at what you found, right? You popped a shell, you exploited a vulnerability here, there, whatever. You jacked a domain credential. It's like, okay, well, we already knew that. So why did you just pay me 20 grand to do this? In terms of value, pen testing is very low today because of the nature of the industry. It's very young. And very few organizations have actually built a mature cybersecurity program, or certainly one that's actually worth testing. And so the value is driven down. Number two is there are 100 pen testers here today. How many risk assessors do you think there are, or awareness trainers? What's happening is there are about, who knows, really 500,000 to 1 million open jobs in cybersecurity today. How many of those do you think are pen testing, percentage-wise? 1%? It's a little higher than that. But what do you think the trend line is for pen testers? It's decreasing. Because as supply increases, demand decreases, right? This is a good capitalist system. And so there are so many pen testers right now, certainly relative to other types of expertise in cybersecurity, is that you all are destroying your futures, right? Because you're driving your own personal value down, right? Again, supply and demand, it's pretty straightforward economics. The more pen testers we have, the fewer we actually need. Now, you couple that with what happened in number one, which is not only is the value driven down and is it commoditized, but when you do deliver the service, the value is lower than everything else. Third is this. Who knew who Dave Kennedy was before you got here? Oh, only a couple of people. All right. Now I'll ask you a different question. How many of you can actually name a quote-unquote famous pen tester? Hadnacky, Long, Nickerson, Kennedy. I mean, the list is very, very long. That's because that's kind of where commercial cybersecurity got started, was in pen testing. So it was very early. And so there are some folks who are very, very good at it, who've made a name for themselves. Okay, another question. How many of you can name a famous risk assessor? Awareness trainer? Vulnerability assessor? Nobody. What? Okay, I don't even know who that is, but okay, I'll take your word for it. Oh, okay, cool. Awesome. So incident response. So the reality is, if you're in this for fame, guess what? Well, the pen testing field is already stacked with people who have already beaten you to it. If you want to do something and get famous for it, you got to pick something else, right? There's plenty of opportunity in cybersecurity to be revolutionary, to do awesome things, and to make a name for yourselves, create a personal brand, whatever it is. But if fame is where you're headed, or fortune from bullet number 2, guess what? You sort of missed the boat on pen testing, right? This is really about other things now. A big problem in cybersecurity today, generally speaking, is that standards are fleeting, right? Whether it's NIST 53 or NIST 30, whatever it is, ISO 27002. There are some standards that are, I'd say, more well adopted. What's the best pen testing standard out there? Yeah, crickets. There isn't one. There are no standards in pen testing partially because we haven't thought of it as a standardized activity, which is, I would agree with that. But then also, it's not old enough to have any standards, right? So there are some competing thoughts, right? PTES and a couple of others, NIST 61, I believe it is, that sort of flirt with what you should be doing or the kinds of tests and outcomes you should be expecting from a pen test, but who actually follows those, right? Because of the nature of a pen test, right? Very dynamic, very organic, very fluid, very let's poke and see what we get and then repoke. It's very difficult to do, to create a standard. But the downstream effect of that is, how do you compare your pen test to someone else's? How do you know when a pen test is good or not good? If there's no finish line to a race, how do you know that you've won? Right? We have a massive issue in pen testing, partially because we don't understand it, partially because the nature of the beast is very organic, and partially because it's very young, that we have no way to measure. So when you're selling your services, or you're the pen tester that just, jacked someone's domain controller, how do you know you did a good job, right? Or produced value, right? And along the way, created a personal brand for yourself, right? Very problematic, because those standards don't exist. There's no measuring stick. And so we don't know how long things are. We don't know how good things are, because it's just not, it's very difficult to measure. Yes?
Wouldn't setting standards create overfitting to the standards, and idea of testing being more adaptive to what
So I would not disagree with you. And so the comment is, well, pen testing being as dynamic as it is, if you attempt to apply standards, do you minimize the efficacy of the service, right? I'd argue that that's also true in risk management, right? Whether you're doing asset-based or vulnerability-based, you got to have a little bit of flex there. Anyone ever tried to change a user's behavior? We require a little bit of flexibility and awareness. So I think cybersecurity in general is a very flexible practice. Pen testing may be at the top there, though, in terms of the kinds of things you need to be prepared for, and our ability to predict what activities we might involve or engage in during the test are largely unknown. You can talk about categories and types, and you might even talk about specific targets and simulations, but the reality is, until we get there, we're not exactly sure what we need to do. Completely agree with that. But I think that also proves the point that if we're looking for standards that we can say, hey, listen, my pen test is better than Joe's pen test or Mary's pen test. Well, guess what? That standard, not only does it not exist today, it's probably not going to exist in the future for the very reason that you just described.
Well, isn't all pen test based upon what the statement of work is, what the client wants you to try to find?
Okay, so a statement of work actually is a measurement. It's a self-created measurement. So your statement of work looks very different than mine, looks very different than his, and so it's not a standard. It's a system of measurement, but not a standard, because you're the only person using it. Right? Your statement of work is completely different, right? If you look at our statement of work today, we don't talk about anything technical. This is about, there's 5 things every organization has to protect. So there's a maximum of 5 things: money, intellectual property, credit cards, identities, and their reputation. If they're protecting anything else, they're wasting their time. Yep.
I think it's important. Those of us who are pen testers here would definitely discriminate between what's an audit and what's a pen test. I feel like rubrics and such are like the name audits, right? There's never going to be an ISO standard for pen testing, because there won't be one for management. It's necessarily a flexible.
Completely agree. I completely agree, which means the environment that pen testers operate in today is difficult to measure and difficult to standardize, and thus the outcomes become questionable. Or it's easy to question someone's pen test. I can look at anyone's findings report, or the sort of the outcomes, the end report from a pen test, and say, well, why didn't you do this? You completely missed this, or like this, but it's very subjective, right? Not anything that you're doing wrong. It's just that the nature of the beast is very dynamic and subjective. Yes? Well, yeah, of course, because today, if I test a specific asset or specific controls on a given asset, tomorrow the results may be completely different for nothing that we did differently in a test, but simply because our environment changes, whether it's apps and patches and users or locations, or it. Everything changes, especially if your test doesn't last for, right? So when we do pen testing, generally the way we price our pen test is by the number of active testing hours, right? There's some fixed costs around it. But if you're doing a 40-hour pen test, you're already at 20 grand. How many organizations are going to spend more than 20 grand on a pen test? Especially when they just got a fax that morning for a pen test for $2,000, right? It's a different thing. It's very hard to compare. However, that data has expiration, and it also, certain data actually increases in value over time. So if we do include social engineering as part of a pen test, and we send a fish, let's say 10 days in, 20 days later, we may end up with that home run, right? The data actually increases in value. But there are some other things that over time, actually there's an expiration to that data because they've either patched or they've changed passwords or they've done other things. And so again, because you guys are proving my point, which is this is a very dynamic activity. And so it's hard to measure. It's hard to standardize on. And again, not a fault of the pen testing community, but you've chosen a career that cannot be measured. Yeah.
Anytime I go and get a pen test for us, I make sure that my vendor is using the penetration test execution standard. If not, I move on.
How well does that work for you?
Better than not having anything.
How many vendors do you find that actually leverage that standard?
That's probably a better conversation over adult beverage.
Right. So I'll admit we don't use it. It's not very useful to us. The way that we think about pen testing, that standard, while I completely respect and understand the objective and the pursuit of that, it's not very useful to us. And we find that it's not very useful to our clients, or at least the types of organizations that we work with. Again, not a problem. It's not the fault of anyone here necessarily, or any pen tester anywhere. It's just that the nature of the beast is one that it's difficult to measure. I'm going to go back to that fax machine. We know that our clients are getting faxes, literally a fax that comes in on top of the one where they could win, a trip for two to the Bahamas or a cruise. There's a $2,500 pen test that is being sold there. And we know there are companies buying those instead of coming to us for these services. Now, are the outcomes different? Maybe. I don't know. But someone could justify a $2,500 pen test. You say, well, you can't get much done in $2,500. That's 10 hours. But again, proving my point that this is a very organic situation. I talk to CEOs every single day. Now, 5 years ago, I would argue that there was a lot of intrigue around pen testing. They wanted the good guys to figure it out before the bad guys did. Today, the bad guys have already figured it out. Right? It's not a matter of getting ahead of that situation. Today, everyone knows they're broken. And so for an organization to come in and say, hey, listen, we want to do a pen test. What are the results of a pen test? Certainly a bunch of exploited vulnerabilities and assets that were compromised, et cetera, et cetera. But also, there's another one that isn't often quantified, which is fear. Right? Every time we get to the point where we can wire money out of a payroll account, guess what? When we present that to a CEO or to a board or an audit committee, they're terrified. Well, guess what? There's no room for fear in business, right? This is about enablement. And so every time we go and scare a CEO, year after year, right, we're able to compromise classified or otherwise critical assets. They're like, I'm kind of tired of being scared. I want to talk about hope. I want to figure out how to fix all this stuff. So don't stop telling me all this scary stuff. I also think, though, there's a bit of desensitization that has gone on in cybersecurity because every one of us, including our clients and the organizations that you work for, are constantly inundated with headlines and news about another organization that failed or was compromised. And okay, we realize that that's sort of the environment that we operate in, but where are the good stories? Because there are a lot of organizations doing good things, or certainly in a much better situation from a risk perspective than they were 12 months ago or 18 months ago. Why aren't we focusing on those things? That's what people buy. If you could buy 2 mirrors, one that made you look fatter than you were or one that made you look skinnier, which one would you buy? It doesn't change your weight, by the way. But one makes you look good and one makes you look bad. Which one are you going to buy? I already know the answer. What was that? I missed that. I didn't hear it. By compliance, yeah. Buy one that helps you check the box. And honestly, a lot of organizations are still doing that. Many organizations, most organizations are compliance driven. But regardless, we want to feel good. And so there's a lot of sociology and psychology behind pen testing in the market for pen tests as well. Who watches Keeping Up with the Kardashians? Anybody? Who watches Deadliest Catch? Who watches The Walking Dead? I've given up on all of these. And not because they're bad shows, but because I'm just kind of tired of them. It's like I want something new. It's like I've been watching Deadliest Catch for literally 11 years. And every season, I get a little excited, and then I'm like, you know what? I don't know. And The Walking Dead, I gave up on 2 years ago because it was like the same thing over and over and over. I just got tired of it. As human beings, our attention span is about this long, especially as Americans, right? We are convenience and freedom driven. We are motivated by fear, survival, and ego, none of which trigger our pen testing genome. This is about something new. I want to be re-stimulated. I want to see something new. And again, no fault of any pen tester or the industry or the standards or the lack thereof. This is about the human condition, which is I need to be constantly stimulated. I need to hear something new, right? Which is why you can manufacture a pop singer in about 30 minutes. You write the song, they get published, they're number one on the radio, and then you don't hear about them ever again. And that's just how we operate. As human beings, we need constant stimulation, and our attention span is very short. And so, because pen testing was something that we got involved in early on in cybersecurity, it was one of the first things that we really started talking about, and the services available and providers that would engage in these services and reactive response to, well, what do we do? What do we when we find certain things? Well, we're getting kind of tired of it. We're going to get tired of risk assessing, by the way. We're going to get tired of awareness as well. It's just that they started later in this whole continuum. And so we're at the point where there are people who's just like, I'm just kind of sick and tired of talking about pen testing. It's just the nature of where we are. So a pen test, how long, you guys all do pen tests. What's the average length of your pen test? So from the moment that you kick the thing off to the moment where you've sort of accepted the findings, anybody have a guess? Anybody have an average? Ours is about 45 days, right? So from the moment we kick that off, go through prep and planning, we talk about targeted assets, or red teaming, blue teaming, black box, gray box, white box. When we get to that, through the active testing phase, through findings, delivery, and really the comment period through acceptance of the findings, 45 days. That's pretty average for us. 45 days is a small part of a cybersecurity program. From a CEO's perspective, if I only deliver pen tests, I only have their attention for 45 days. If I'm delivering a program, I've got it every day, all year, and next year. If I'm doing risk, I've got it every day, all day. If I've got awareness, I'm doing it every day, all day. I've got their attention all day. So purely from a business perspective, if you're selling services, guess what? If you're selling pen tests, they're only going to do one a year. Or maybe they'll do, a client will do one when they turn up a new asset, new subnet, they're doing an acquisition. They may engage in something like that, but you've got their attention for a short period of time. In terms of your career, does that sound advantageous? Right. You want to be in front of them more often and for a more engaged period of time. Pen testing, there's just no way to position it where you do a pen test every single day. That's just not the way we do that. It's just not the way pen tests are conducted. Maybe in the future, today, it's a short period of time. And then the last thing is this. You're all smart people, obviously. But breaking things is easier than fixing them. That's the bottom line. That's a fact. So for us, this is, and certainly there's a massive talent shortage in cybersecurity in general, including pen testers today. We're looking for folks who can do a lot of different things, but primarily there's a lot more stuff that needs to be fixed than needs to be broken today. And breaking is easier, right? The smartest people will figure out, well, how do we, not just necessarily avoid, but how do we deter? How do we detect? How do we respond to this? How do we minimize the impact of incidents like this, right? We need smart people like you to think about the other side of this coin, which is, okay, everyone's broken and they're going to continue being broken for a long time. How do I get involved? How do I become a variable in this equation that isn't just piling on, that is doing something else, that can be challenging to me, right? And requires expertise and maybe even genius at times. For me, this is about other things. Pen testing is just easier. It's just easier than other things.
I don't know where Rex.
We cool?
Like it never happened. Boys, this is Raquel. Someday, all this will be hers.
Hi. So, what's with the outfits? You guys going to a volleyball game or something?
I'm taking my lady out for breakfast. Maybe I can drop you two off. Where do you live?
Redondo?
Inglewood.
It's your future. I see a cab ride. Move out of the sticks, fellas. Say goodnight, Raquel.
Good night, Raquel.
I'll see you guys around. Stay out of trouble, you crazy kids.
Mr. Wolf, I just want to tell you it was a real pleasure watching you work.
Yeah, really. And thank you very much, Mr. Wolf.
Call me, Winston. You see that, young lady? Respect. Respect for one's elders shows character.
I have character.
Because you are a character doesn't mean that you have character.
Okay, so my plea to you, first of all, I've done this presentation at a couple of different hacker conferences, B-Sides, et cetera. And my goal, of course, was to get you guys a little bit riled, a little bit thinking about doxing me or whatever. But the reality is that there is massive, massive opportunity in cybersecurity today where I see pen testing and pen testers in general is in sort of the bottom in terms of long-term opportunity. Not only that, we have half a dozen open positions right now just in Troy. That's not even in Rochester, Providence, and Philly for risk assessors and awareness trainers and people who can build a program and strategize with CEOs on, well, how do we make cybersecurity a competitive advantage instead of just a cost center, right? And how do we actually introduce resilience to organizations, whether it's a hospital or a bank or a college? This is a long-term problem, right? For us, this is about looking at the rest of the system and not just focusing on pen testing. And I realize this is a hacker conference and that this presentation was, intentionally designed to be a little bit irritating. So I appreciate the commentary, by the way. But we're hiring, and we are looking for smart people to help us do everything else. I'm not sure if we have pen testing openings, but we may have those as well. So, questions? Sarcastic jokes? Other digital eggs and tomatoes? All right. careers@greatcastlesecurity.com. Connect with me on social media at Harnish. Appreciate your time and looking forward to better things.